Tonight, the debate over whether to install a state monitor for the East Ramapo School District continues to percolate. We'll talk to the state senator who has a bill that would do just that. Then race is becoming a big issue in the presidential race. And wait till you hear what President Obama just said about the issue. As his presidency starts winding down, he is getting wound up. Also, Donald Trump doing a whole lot of talking, but is he resonating? We'll tell you why the Donald might not want to quit his day job hosting The Apprentice. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in tonight for Richard French. And tonight we start once again with East Ramapo, a story that you know we've been following very closely. The issue is whether to install a state monitor at the East Ramapo School District. A couple of weeks ago, the state assembly passed a bill that would put in a monitor with veto power over school board decisions. A state report that was highly critical of the district recommended that step. East Ramapo has in recent years funneled more and more money out of public schools and into private Jewish yeshivas, particularly to pay for things like transportation and special ed. The state Senate has its own bill. It calls for the state comptroller's office to have oversight powers over the district instead of having a state monitor get essentially all the power. And the man who sponsored that bill in the state Senate joins me now. David Carlucci is a Democratic state senator who represents Rockland County. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start, first of all, and we have a lot to cover, but I want to start with the position of the East Ramapo School Board itself, and it's been hard to get on the record. I talked this weekend with Aaron Weeder, the former head of the school board. He's now the majority leader in Rockland County. He basically says the monitor's report was flawed, not a reflection of the district actions. The basic solution is that we need better PR in the district, more money from Albany, and not much more than that. Your district includes East Ramapo. What's your response to Aaron Weeder, and whose view of the district and its problems is more accurate?
Well, it's a very difficult, complex situation, and that's why it's so hard to say we're going to solve the problems of East Ramapo with a silver bullet. It's just not going to happen. I've been working on this issue for years, and we've come further than we've ever come before, and I'm so grateful to my Assembly colleagues for passing our bill in the Assembly. We worked together on that legislation as a direct response of Hank Greenberg's report. Now, the problem we ran into is when I got final confirmation after lobbying for months Senate leadership that told me that our bill would not come to the floor in the Senate. Now, obviously, I was very disappointed, very frustrated, but I had a choice to make. Either we leave session with nothing and we have another year of complete chaos for the District of East Ramapo, or we can work together and get a compromise and get something done to start moving the ball in a new direction.
And your position is that an oversight monitor of some sort is necessary for East Ramapo. I assume you're not questioning what was in the Greenberg report.
No, not at all. I think that if anything, the Greenberg report could have been more comprehensive, but he had a limited amount of time with limited direction. The idea that we had, myself working with my Assembly colleagues, is to have a monitor down on the ground with veto power. And that's where we came into problems in the Senate. It was passed in the Assembly. It was narrowly passed, only by 4 votes. So it was contentious in the Assembly, but they were able to do it. The Senate is a different animal. There's a 1-seat majority. I work well with the Republicans, but I am in the minority, and so it's a struggle to get it passed. So by having the Senate leadership tell me, look, your bill is dead on arrival, we're not doing it, they were going to leave home, they were going to leave the session doing nothing. And I said, that's unacceptable. We have to have movement. And that's where I was working with the Senate leadership and my colleagues in the Assembly to try to bring us closer to our original bill to get something done.
So your take is that you'd like a monitor with veto power in place, but you don't think it can pass the Senate. So
well,
it's better to do something than to do nothing. Is that?
That's exactly correct. Yes, and that was really hard. And that's where I could have dug in my heels and said no. We have to have the monitor with veto power. That's what I would like to see. I know that's just not going to happen now with the leadership telling me that they do not want to do that.
One of the upsides of a monitor with veto power is that they can stop a bad situation or a bad decision before it's enacted.
That's right.
Your bill seems like it would be a little more reactive as opposed to proactive in that sense.
Right.
Is it enough to keep the district on the direction where it needs to be?
Well, look, and that's where I say even having a monitor with veto power, we know that's not going to solve all the problems. It could help us mitigate immediate problems, but these issues are long-term. Right? We've got to have a monitor on the ground that will be there to be able to object to decisions that are made by the board. And that's where we set up an appeals process that the monitor would be able to appeal decisions to the state education department or to the comptroller. They would decide, and they would have 30 days to either accept, reject, or modify that board's decision. In addition to that, we also have a long-term strategic plan, and that's the real meat of this legislation. That's how we're going to have to get leadership in the Senate and the Assembly, the governor on board to correct some of these issues in East Ramapo. There's a lot of gray area, and I equate it to saying, look, education policy in New York hasn't kept up with the 21st century, particularly when we talk about East Ramapo. It's at a crossroads, and this is where we've got to move forward and get legislation passed to help them, not just with a monitor, but some of these long-term problems.
Where is your bill right now? Do you have enough votes in the Senate to get it passed? And would there be enough votes in the Assembly to get it passed?
Well, that's where working with the Senate leadership, I worked with them, pulled them further than they had been to get as close as possible to our original bill. And part of it was a deal to get the Assembly on board to not just pass a one-house bill, but to get something passed in both houses on the floor, on the governor's desk, and signed into law. So that's where I am right now. Legislation has been, the session has been extended because of unfinished business, and so there's still time on the clock, and that's where I'm going to be pushing like crazy to get the Assembly and the Senate as close together as possible to get this legislation passed, so we could get the ball rolling and start talking about real reform.
Last question on East Ramapo. Help me with this if you can. You're an IDC member, so you work with Republicans as much as, and if not more than, other Democrats in the state Senate would. GOP positions on education when it comes to charter schools or mayoral control or other school issues seems to be whatever we can do to help school kids, let's do it to help school kids. Let's put them first. That doesn't seem to be the approach they're taking when it comes to East Ramapo. There are other objections that seem to be placing ahead of that. Why the resistance to a monitor in East Ramapo from Senate Republicans?
Well, I can't speak for Senate Majority
Some of them may
Leader.
have said something to you.
Well, what their big objection to is the veto, right? Overriding a local elected board. And that's something that they have a major problem with. I think there's politics involved as well. But you got to see, this is something where I hate for it to turn totally partisan. There's Republicans and Democrats that are opposed to this. There's Republicans and Democrats that are in favor of it. But the legislation that I've put forward, I think, really starts us moving in a new direction. Gives the monitor the ability to sit in on executive session, gives them the ability to object to decisions made by the board. Also, we have in there a $5 million grant opportunity for East Ramapo. It's in a locked box directly controlled by the Commissioner of Education. The problems we have in East Ramapo, the public school population is deprived of extracurricular activities, deprived of things like advanced placement, even full-day kindergarten is in jeopardy. By having that $5 million grant, it's a short-term solution, but it's money that is directed, every penny of that $5 million would be allocated by the Commissioner of Education, going to public school. So there's really three things in this bill. There's a monitor on the ground, the ability to appeal decisions, the long-term strategic plan, which will help us with special education, transportation, English language learners, all the problems we're having with East Ramapo. In addition, have in real time $5 million infused into the district next year to help us with some of these immediate problems that we're dealing with.
Want to move on to some of the other issues that remain out there. We're into overtime for the legislative session.
Yeah.
It's big ugly time, which is maybe the most appropriately named thing you can come up with.
It's the only time where I'm happy that we still have session, because we still have an opportunity to get East Ramapo passed.
As East Ramapo doesn't look like it's being included in any of these last-minute big deals, the big ugly that's going through. Besides East Ramapo, you're headed up to Albany tomorrow.
Yes.
Is that correct? What's on the agenda? What gets voted on tomorrow?
Well, it's still to be foreseen. There's still negotiations going on about rent control. That's the big issue that's going on. The reason why we're going back tomorrow is because the rent regulations have been extended 5 days. That's all anyone could agree on.
Is there another temporary extender coming, or do you think there might be
either we'd have a deal, a long-term deal, or it'd have to be a short extender? And that's why the end of session is uncertain. And that's why some of these issues need to be worked out, obviously. There's a lot of big issues out there. And I would hope that East Ramapo could be included in that. I've reached out to the governor and asked that he provide his leadership to help broker a deal between the Assembly, the Senate, and himself. The bill that I amended and put in that's live and ready to go would have the governor appointing the monitor. And I think that's extremely important because we need the governor invested in this issue. The only way we're going to get long-term resolve is by having the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor on board to have real structural changes going forward.
Very quickly on some of these other issues, you mentioned rent control. There's the 421A property tax breaks. A lot of people want to see them reconfigured to provide for affordable housing. Do you think that's What do you think the status of that is? Do you see a resolution to that in the next couple of days?
These are the big issues.
Right.
I mean, this is an issue where obviously the mayor and the governor have been at loggerhead with. That's where we have these big problems. That's been there hasn't been able to get a resolution.
But you're much more tuned in to what's going on than we are watching from the sidelines. What's your sense? Is there some clearing there through the woods?
As of until I stepped into this studio, I haven't heard anything about any compromise being done, and that's why I say that unless something is worked out by tomorrow at 3 o'clock when we go into session, I think that there could be short-term extenders, just extending this on, and that's why right now it's very uncertain as to when session will actually end. So that's why, as long as there's time on the clock. For me, East Ramapo is the most important issue, and we have to now take this opportunity where we've been in the limelight, where we've had this opportunity. It's not just the residents of East Ramapo talking about it. We have people around the state talking about it. This is our opportunity to get legislation passed, and the legislation that's on the table right now that I'm talking about is 1,000 miles ahead of where we are right now. And if we continue at the status quo, we are leaving our children behind.
Finally, Senator, you mentioned the governor's role in your bill in appointing the monitor for East Ramapo. What's your sense of the governor's level of involvement at this point in the session? Do you want to see him more involved? Is he less involved than he has been in sessions past?
Well, obviously, the governor has a lot on his plate. There's no question. And East Ramapo is a local issue. I think it's a local issue now, but it'll affect districts surrounding it and really send ripple effects throughout the state. We need the governor's leadership involved. I've talked to the governor about this. He said he wants a resolution, but now is the time to get more involved, bring the parties together to have a resolution so we can move forward.
State Senator David Carlucci, Democrat, IDC from Rockland County, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the roundtable joins us. We'll talk about what's going on in Albany and how the impasse up there is impacting millions of people in our area.